Thanks for being here, Potterheads. You've got a new chapter for Backward with Purpose, Part 1, Always and Always, by Dead Woodpecker. We are on Chapter 46, Always and Always.
Chapter 46, The Sweet Far Thing. Chapter text. The country lane was quiet. A spring breeze rustled the leaves in the orchard, and dappled sunlight shone through. Harry put his hand on the small of Ginny's back and stared at the crooked building that had countless good memories attached to it. In many ways, he had been given back his stolen childhood. This building, along with Hogwarts, Godric's Hollow, and Grimmauld Place, had been a kind of home. Not fully, not completely, but his experience with his parents in that strange limbo between life and death had taught him what he valued most: home. And the burrow came close to being the home he had never really had, because of the people in it. They had not yet been back here. Spring had eased into summer, and it had been an unspoken agreement that Harry, Ginny, Ron, and, by default, Hermione, would not go back to the burrow until most of the mess that had been made had been cleaned up. It was a reward, but the Death Eaters who had not been taken down at the final battle had been rounded up, given trials, and thrown into Azkaban. The Dementors had been exiled. The Ministry had welcomed the Muggleborns back with recompense, apologies, and a large ceremony. A large ceremony much like that had taken place earlier this afternoon. Harry grimaced, remembering. I hate giving speeches, he thought sourly. Ginny, who obviously felt something through the ephemeral connection they now shared, squeezed his hand. Though she doesn't really need to feel my feelings to know what's going on in my head, Harry admitted to himself. He glanced down at her. She knew him almost better than he knew himself. They had been inseparable since the moment Harry had caught her. Are you ready? Asked Ginny. Harry nodded. They walked, hands clasped, the rest of the way up the lane. It seemed like a different lifetime, and Harry knew very well what having two separate lifetimes felt like. When he had been exiled from the burrow, he could remember the snow crunching under his feet, could feel the weight of his trunk, and could hear the distant shouting. But the anger, resentment, and hurt that had sunk into his bones had disappeared. His heart felt very light. I'm glad that's over, said Harry. He fiddled with his Order of Merlin First Class for valor. It was the size of his fist, made out of blown glass with an ebony base inlaid with opals and diamonds. Inside it was a blue flame that would burn forever. He could not keep his eyes from traveling back to it every few moments. Me too, Ginny said, heartfelt. Kingsley's pretty brilliant, you know? I never quite appreciated that fully. Harry could not agree more. Kingsley, who had assumed the position of Minister for Magic with skill, had spun a tale of half-truths that did enough to explain exactly why Harry, Ginny, and Ron had received a new class of the Order of Merlin. They had, of course, refused to explain about the time travel. He had briefly wondered if he was drawing his secrets close to him as Aberforth had once accused Albus Dumbledore of doing. But the potential for disaster was too great. No, it was best if it remained a secret. Future spouses would know, of course. Someday Harry and Ginny, Ron and Hermione would tell their children. What was that? Ginny asked, startled. What was what? Harry furrowed his brow. That feeling you just had. She looked perplexed. I've not felt it before. Don't you sometimes wish this emotion-sharing thing came with a textbook? Harry asked. Yes, Ginny replied immediately. And then we could have Hermione read it and tell us what's happening. It was frustrating not to have a name for this new level of sharing. What had seemed like a fluke after Voldemort had tried to kill Ginny and had been felled with his own rebounded curse had become something permanent. Harry could feel her inside him as if he was blown glass, and she was everlasting flame. You're thinking about me, Ginny said. But what was it you thought about before? There was this tenderness I've never felt off you. I thought about the children we're going to have, Harry admitted. He felt another little burst of joy and could not tell whether it came from Ginny or himself. His future stretched out before him. There were no regrets. Voldemort was gone, and Harry did not feel that awful pain that he'd known would never go away. He was free to grow old with her, to father children, and to live and laugh. Let's go inside before we start grinning at each other all night, said Ginny. Again, Harry had expected they would be the last to arrive. The burrow was filled to bursting with members of the Order of the Phoenix. Only those who knew everything had been invited. Tomorrow, there would be a public party on the grounds of Hogwarts. Tonight, a more private celebration was in order. So the crooked little home was bustling with everyone Harry loved most, except Ron and Hermione. "Where's Ron?" Harry asked anyone who would listen. "I want to tease him for crying." "Hermione's probably comforting him," Fred smirked. He gave Harry a small grin, but looked away quickly before walking off to find George. Harry watched him go, feeling a small pang. He had hoped that all could be forgiven and forgotten. It had seemed as though things were heading that way before the final battle. He winced when he remembered the way in which he had thrown the truth at them. He'd slapped them in the face with it. It had felt great at the time. He'd felt vindicated. He'd wanted to hurt them as much as they'd hurt him, and it had not helped matters any that he had been drunk. He did not like being reminded how self-righteous he had been. "We'll just have to work at it," Harry murmured. "It'll happen," Ginny said bracingly. Harry nodded. His newly positive outlook on life in general was strong enough to endure the slight distance at which the Weasleys had kept themselves from him. It couldn't last forever. He'd make it up to them eventually. He could not help, however, looking around for Arthur Weasley. Perhaps it was because he was at the burrow, and it might have been because he could use advice, but Harry found himself wishing that he could take some snacks out to the shed. More than that, he wanted the type of relationship that he once had with Arthur. Instead, he wandered over to where Sirius, Remus, and, to his surprise, Snape already sat at the long table in the backyard of the burrow. They'd lit a lantern against the approaching night. Their Order of Merlin, first classes, which looked quite like Harry's, though without the diamonds in the base, did not quite cast enough of a glow, though they were displayed proudly before them nonetheless. Harry glanced around and grinned. The abundance of awards were the decorative theme. Molly had set them out like candles. The smaller Order of Merlin, second classes, which had been received by all the Weasleys, floated in the air above the table. Harry still found himself shocked by the camaraderie between Snape and the other two. A part of him simply thought it just wasn't normal that the three of them had actively sought each other out. As he watched, Tonks, displaying her rather flashy engagement ring, swung her leg over the bench to sit beside Remus. The floor dropped out from under his feet when he realized what exactly they were talking about. "You damn well are going to be a marauder," Sirius said. "Don't give me any bullshit, Snavellis." "I had planned to rise above it," said Snape. He did not appear as though he wanted to argue at all. In fact, he looked as pleased as Harry had ever seen him. "If you notice, I don't feel compelled to engage in your petty squabbles." Sirius gave a great snort of disbelief. "Sure," he said. "I'll remind you that you said that. Now, we've tried to come up with a marauder name for you, and we just can't do it. You'll have to help us. We've had to put the matter to serious thought," Remus said. "We can't just give you a name that doesn't have any meaning. Which is why I think Greasy is splendid," Sirius interrupted smoothly. "Will the two of you ever grow up?" Snape said. Harry hid a smile. "He's always reminded me of a giant bat," said Harry. "How about Batty?" Sirius and Remus roared with laughter, and Tonks chuckled appreciatively. At Snape's quelling glare, he added, "Sorry, Professor Batty." "What about Slippery?" Tonks asked. Remus winked at her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. Then he exchanged an incredulous look with Sirius. "Girls can't help name marauders," Sirius said kindly. "So sorry, cousin, but even if we did like the name Dash—" "Which we don't," Snape said irritably. He kept his face hidden, and Harry suspected that he was smiling. "We couldn't accept it," Remus said apologetically. "Don't look at me like that, love." James made the rules. Several more suggestions, and one hex later, and the tempers at the far side of the table were running high. Snape had just cast a bat bogey hex at Sirius for suggesting Mugglebane. Granted, his heart had obviously not been in it. Only two little bats escaped from Sirius' nostrils, and Sirius continued to laugh, apparently not noticing small winged animals fleeing from his body. "How about Blackheart?" Harry suggested. "Black H-A-R-T, for you know the deer. And it sounds like Blackheart, so your reputation for hating Snape won't be ruined, Sirius." Sirius and Remus looked at each other. Then they looked at Snape with identical expressions of intense concentration. Harry began to wonder how they'd ever named themselves. Perhaps the 4 years they'd spent trying to become Animagi had, in actuality, been spent trying to figure out their nicknames. "I like it," Remus said finally. Sirius' gray eyes glinted wickedly when he turned to Harry. "I'm happy to see that you're so well-adjusted to having a black-hearted rogue like Snivellus Dash." "I believe you are to call me Blackheart now, Dash," Snape interrupted. "Love your mother," Sirius finished. He drew his wand and twirled it in his fingers. "Care to send bats at me again, Blackheart?" Harry rolled his eyes. "When do I get to join the Marauders?" "Sorry, kid." Sirius shook his head sadly. "It's another one of your dad's rules. As soon as you were born, he said to me that you'd have to start your own gang." "You seem to treat my dad's words like law," Harry said slyly. He had suddenly remembered what his father had told him to tell Sirius. "No girls allowed. No kids allowed. Those are the rules," Sirius said. Harry tapped his chin thoughtfully. "I'm sure Dad will be happy that you're still listening to him all these years later." "Are rules anything like bets? Like, if the two of you had made a bet, you'd still honor it, even though he's dead?" "Of course," Sirius said virtuously. "So, I take it you'll be naming your first child Elvin Dork?" Harry asked. "It's unisex, you know." Sirius and Remus gaped at him. Harry smirked to himself as they tried to work out how, exactly, he had known about the terms of some long-forgotten bet. Warmth flooded his belly when he realized that he really had met his parents. His father had given him the gift of proof and tormented his best friend as an added bonus. "How in Merlin's name did you know about that?" Sirius asked. "We never told anyone." "He told me," Harry said simply, "after the curse. Before I came back. He was there, and Mum, and Neville." Harry was not able to elaborate. The moment Sirius opened his mouth to ask questions, Ron and Hermione appeared right next to Harry, and both were in a state of high dudgeon. Hermione's hair had come undone and was floating bushily around her face. Ron's face was bright red. Harry thought they might be fighting again, until Hermione roared. "Merlin has done it again," she shouted. She was quite undone. It appeared as though the mysterious Merlin had finally pushed her too far. "Look at this. Look what he did." She thrust something in Harry's face. To his surprise, it was their copy of Memories Unbound. It was blank. Every single page had been wiped clean. Harry flipped back and forth. Others began to congregate around him, and there were murmurs of shock and consternation. Arthur had returned from wherever he had disappeared to, and the twins had started a lively discussion of their current theory as to who Merlin had been. "That's not it," Hermione said wrathfully. "Look," she flipped to the very first page. It was the only one with any writing on it. It was spindly and untidy. It had been handwritten rather than typeset. "All had better fucking be well," it read. Harry mouthed the words to himself several times. He thought of the implications of what it meant that the writings of the wise ASP had been obliterated. He had the sneaking suspicion that Merlin had been thorough in his work. Harry doubted that he would ever be privy to the secrets of time travel again. He was grateful. "I guess Merlin doesn't want us traveling in time anymore," he said casually. Hermione spluttered with rage. She apparently did not like having knowledge taken away from her. "At least we know that Merlin isn't Molly," Arthur said unexpectedly. She'd never used that word. Everyone looked over at the Lone Order of Merlin, first class that did not yet have an owner. Harry was not sure if it ever would. Would Merlin even feel the need to come back in time after the truly miraculous way things had played out? But still, the symbol of having someone help, or attempt to help, with the long task of defeating Voldemort was important. "He was a bit of an asshole, wasn't he?" Ron said fondly, and he started to laugh. "Christmas." Harry tripped down the stairs at the burrow. He'd finally been given an excuse to leave Ginny's side, and if he wanted to carry through with the plan, he had to act fast. Afternoon was already waning, and dinner would be served soon. If he couldn't find Mr. Weasley soon, he'd have to change everything. Mrs. Weasley was busy preparing the various dishes that would be served with Christmas dinner. For a moment, he stood outside the kitchen and breathed in the aroma of truly delicious food. "Mrs. Weasley?" Harry said tentatively. "Oh, hello, Harry dear," she said. She smiled at him, but it did not quite reach her eyes. But Harry pretended like he hadn't noticed. He'd done a great deal of damage when he had shown them the memories. Dumbledore had been right. But even the slight distance was worth being able to spend time with them, to get to know them again. He fully hoped that one day, the past could be forgiven, and if his plan went well, he might just get another Weasley sweater. Where is everyone? Ron hasn't thundered through here demanding food in at least an hour, and I'm starting to get worried. Harry chuckled. Ron's up in the attic hiding, I expect. Once Dora started talking in great detail about her pregnancy, he ran up there, followed closely by Remus and Sirius, I might add. She laughed a little. Man, she said, are we still expecting Albus and Severus? As far as I know, Harry shrugged. As much as he wanted to keep talking to her, this was about the longest conversation they had since Tom Riddle died. He had to talk to Mr. Weasley. Listen, do you know where your husband is? I've got to talk to him. She looked stunned, and something utterly indefinable was in her eyes. He's out in his shed. Harry paused. Of all the places, Mr. Weasley would be in his shed. The last time he had gone to speak to him there. But he pushed that thought away. This is for Ginny, he told himself firmly. It helped that he knew that Mr. Weasley would be polite. He wouldn't turn him away, even if there was that distance between Harry and all the Weasleys except Ginny, Ron, and Percy. Still, he had to ask, do you think he'd mind if I? No, she said quickly. No. Do you want to bring him a snack? Isn't dinner almost ready? Harry asked curiously. She turned away, back to the meal she was preparing, and nodded. Yes, I suppose that wouldn't be a good idea. Would you let him know, when you're done, of course, that dinner will be ready soon? I was about to go out there myself to tell him. Of course, Harry said. As he walked out the back door, he felt both nervous and elated. He could not imagine that Mr. Weasley would refuse him. Everyone in the world knew how much he loved Ginny, but he suspected that every man felt a mild sense of trepidation when they asked a father if they could marry his daughter. Fred, George, Bill, and Charlie almost distracted him. They bewitched a section of the yard to look as it might in the early summer. Fleur sat on a blanket, watching as the four brothers roared with laughter at the game they played with several dozen enchanted umbrellas. Harry grinned. Having fun, he asked. They stopped laughing immediately, though Fleur turned a wide smile at him. Almost as abruptly as the laughter stopped, they all pasted jovial grins on their faces. At least they're trying, Harry thought. The mean looks and hatred were gone. Harry could live with the fact that he'd hurt them, but only hoped that things changed. Hi, Harry, Fred said loudly. We're playing swords with umbrellas, George pointed out needlessly. We could use a fifth. You have to be on our team, Bill indicated himself and Charlie. These two are cheaters. It's not Gryffindor's sword, but it's pretty fun. There's a while until dinner, Charlie said. They've been like this for several months now. They tripped all over each other to talk to him, but Harry knew that they didn't really want him there. Still, he may have accepted had he not had things to do. Sorry, Harry said. I've actually got to talk to your dad. All four of them exchanged significant looks, but Harry had no idea what it meant and had no time to try to figure it out. The Weasleys were acting slightly odd, odder than usual, but it could just be Christmas spirit. He's in the shed, Bill said. Thanks, Harry told him. Your mum told me. The door was open a crack, and Harry took a deep breath and pushed it all the way open. He looked at the table first, wondering, with great fondness, what sort of muggle tool had driven Mr. Weasley out here on Christmas Day. He furrowed his brow. There was nothing there. Even stranger, Mr. Weasley sat with his head in his hands. Harry had the momentary urge to run away, but he looked closer and saw that the older man was not crying, but merely looked tired. He looked back at the burrow. It was full of guests at the moment, and would be even more packed with friends and family. He'd probably been looking for an escape. Is it time for dinner, Molly? He asked without looking up. I'll be right out. I thought he might come today. Harry said. Not Mrs. Weasley. Mr. Weasley lifted his head and looked at Harry as if he had seen a ghost. Harry, he said a little bit too enthusiastically. There was again the same thing he'd been noticing for months. The overly nice greeting that cleverly masked the fact that Harry had hurt them badly, but they were making too much of an effort to hide it. Harry did not know whether it would ever completely go away. Hi, Harry said. Mrs. Weasley told me I could find you out here. You didn't bring a snack? Mr. Weasley asked. Well, no. Harry said. What is it with the snacks? Dinner is almost ready. Ah, Mr. Weasley's smile slipped. I suppose. Is there something you'd like to talk about? It sort of sounded like a dismissal, but Harry couldn't be sure. Suddenly, he had to ask Arthur Weasley a different question, and not the one he had been intending to ask. He saw that he could not, in good conscience, ask the second unless he had an answer to the first. Mr. Weasley, Harry licked his suddenly dry lips. Is it possible, do you think that, you'll ever be able to forgive me and the rest of your family? What? He said blankly. They stared at each other, and Mr. Weasley looked just as confused as Harry felt. The moments sped by in silence. Did you just ask if we could forgive you? Mr. Weasley finally spoke. Harry said. Yeah, what I did. Give me a minute. Mr. Weasley held up his hand. He seemed to be steeling himself to do something. Harry, I came out here today hoping that you would join me. I've done it these last several months, whenever I knew you'd be here. Do you know why? Harry shook his head, but he began to feel a bright spark of hope. When you died, he continued, I saw you. So Ginny wasn't the only one to see some sort of vision. He suspected, however, that Arthur Weasley's was quite different from hers. He wondered if Ron had too, and Hermione, Percy, and Luna. And if they did, why didn't they say anything? We were right back here, in this shed, he told him. His eyes were vague, and he stared at a point just over Harry's left shoulder. I asked why you didn't fight, or defend yourself. I didn't understand. I didn't know about the Horcrux in you. Not until later. And you said that it was because you had to, and that you couldn't live with yourself if you walked away and let me die. He paused. It was very personal, Harry. You didn't say all of you or my girlfriend's father. You took that curse and meant to die for all of us. But we all saw different things. Molly, Bill, Charlie, Percy, Fred, and George, and I assume everyone else who had a rune. And I'm having a hard time explaining this. We all felt like it was an individual thing. Like even if I had been the only one in the Great Hall, preparing to fight, you still would have done it. Harry blinked at him. Of course he would have done it. Of course I would have, he said. I had to. It was the only way. Mr. Weasley laughed shakily. Percy said you wouldn't understand. I don't, Harry admitted. Well, maybe a little. If I could go back, I wouldn't have chosen the memories I did when you found out the truth. But the fact of the matter is, Harry felt uncomfortable and vulnerable saying it. But he forced himself to. Love you guys. You don't understand at all, Mr. Weasley said. We know that you love us. How could we not? You died for us. We don't think we deserve it. Harry gaped at him. All of you feel this way? That's why you've been acting strange? It wasn't because I hurt you with those memories. Joy filled him, and he knew he was right. It explained everything. He stood up and couldn't stop himself from grinning from ear to ear. That is quite possibly the best news I've had in a very long time. I thought it was going to take time, but Harry knew that he was being completely incoherent, but it didn't matter at all. Mr. Weasley, he said suddenly. I'll explain in a few minutes, but I'd like to do so with the entire family around. Do you mind? He shook his head. Oh, Harry said, I just have to ask. This'll make it even more perfect. He'd planned a speech, had intended to have a long discussion about how much he wanted to marry Ginny, but he abandoned it. Mr. Weasley, I love your daughter so deeply that I can't imagine living without her. I want to marry her, again, but this time with your blessing. Please. Of course, the older man said promptly, but he looked as though he had been hit in the head by a bludger. I can't think of a better man for her. Thank you, Harry said earnestly. Now I need to go back inside. I have things I need to say to all of you. He actually pulled on Mr. Weasley's arm. Now that he knew, he could not possibly wait a moment longer than necessary. Bill, Fleur, Charlie, Fred, and George had already gone inside. Harry drew his wand and said, Sonorous, and feeling almost giddy with relief, said, Everyone please meet me in the sitting room. All Weasleys, all guests. That means you, Ron. I'll make sure that Dora doesn't start talking about how she's preparing for breastfeeding again. Harry hurried across the yard, Mr. Weasley right behind him. He could hear the thunder of many feet going down the stairs, crashes and shouts. Mrs. Weasley opened the door to let them through, and Harry swept her into a tight hug, which she returned just as tightly. I have no idea what's going on, Mr. Weasley told his wife. but he's very happy. Happy didn't even begin to describe what Harry was feeling right now. The thing that he had missed for well over a decade was finally within his grasp. He'd given up on it 5 years ago, but he'd begun to hope for it these last months, and now he almost had it. "What's this about, Harry?" Ron asked. He beamed at them. Hermione sat curled up on Ron's lap in a large armchair. Sirius, Remus, and Dora were squashed next to Bill and Fleur. Charlie and the twins had parked on the floor. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley squeezed their way past them to find a seat on the only empty armchair left in the room. Albus and Severus had apparently just arrived and stood in the doorway. Percy stood by the Christmas tree with his arms around his new girlfriend, Audrey, and Ginny picked her way around her family and came to stand next to him. He didn't think that he'd seen anything quite so wonderful. "You going to say something anytime soon, mate?" Ron asked. "Or have you been drinking?" Harry put his arm around Ginny. I thought that you lot were still hurt by how I showed you those memories. I thought that I had done too much damage that day for it to easily heal. And I was a right arse for months. I treated the lot of you like rubbish," Harry admitted. He could see now that he had, in many ways, treated the Weasleys the way Severus Snape had once treated him. The thought made him uncomfortable and guilty, even now. "Harry, you weren't Percy began. "We deserved it," Bill and Charlie chorused together. "We didn't blame you," Fred said earnestly. But before they could continue to fall all over themselves to ensure Harry that they did not blame him in the slightest for his reprehensible behavior, he held up his hand. Another thought had just occurred to him. "And I've wondered if your distance was due to what happened at Azkaban," Harry said. "I couldn't help but think that you'd wonder." He fixed his eyes on a point somewhere over Severus' shoulder. "If I was just as bad as Voldemort." "Not." He held up his hands swiftly when he saw the mutinous looks. "That I think I am. I just wondered. If I recall correctly, Harry, us Weasleys were the ones to offer the most violent deaths," Arthur said. Harry met his eyes and saw that he was telling the truth. "We never blamed you. I'm not even sure if I blame myself. I thought Percy was dead, you see." Harry nodded. He remembered what he had seen in the Department of Mysteries. He could still see the way the runes shone and shimmered, spinning lazily in the air. "Why didn't you tell me that you had some sort of vision?" Harry asked Ron suddenly. Ron looked surprised. "I thought you knew. How could I possibly have known?" Harry scoffed. "I was mucking about with magic that I don't really understand," he added cheerfully. "How reassuring," Severus murmured. Harry ignored this. Albus, he addressed Dumbledore most of all because he had always had answers, it seemed. "The terrible power wasn't just terrible for me and Voldemort. It was terrible for them." There was a ringing silence. Harry had the disconcerting feeling of once more being the center of attention. He was quite proud of his revelation. He had amazingly forgotten that they had thought him dead, and he had not known that Ginny was not the only one to have a vision. He put himself in their shoes and realized that had it been Ginny or any of the others that had died and had sent a last message, it might have killed him. His high spirits wilted a bit when no one reacted. No one realized the brilliance. And worst of all, Ginny was feeling exasperated and a little amused. "You're completely mental, mate," Ron said finally. "But is this actually new to you?" Ron continued. He sounded incredulous. "What? You think we liked seeing you die and knowing that there wasn't a damn thing we could do about it?" "No," Harry said. "But I accept that you didn't realize what happened with the rune." "Harry," Hermione said coolly. "It was perfect, by the way. We were in the library, and there were books all around, and I said that she paused to clear her throat. It didn't make sense that one person had to do what you did. It was such an imbalance. And you just rolled your eyes at me like you do whenever I'm going off on elf rights or those stupid laws about the centaurs. And you said that not everything has to make sense. Love doesn't really make sense. I'm pretty deep when I'm dead," Harry tried to say flippantly. He felt very uncomfortable all of a sudden. "Don't joke about it," she said forcefully. "It was a beautiful experience, Harry. But it was terrible, too. I can't even describe it, Harry. It hurt quite a lot. If you hadn't come back, I don't know, but I can't imagine ever recovering from it." Not for the first time, Harry wondered what the hell he had done when he'd made those runes. He didn't regret it, and he could tell from the defiant, fierce looks on the faces around him that they didn't regret it either. But still, it was obvious that there had been a level of emotional intimacy breached when he had been hit with the curse. He wondered if his soul had had conversations with their souls on the moment of his death. The thought filled him with a sense of wonder, and the realization that he would likely never find out what he had done. And he didn't really have to. I keep thinking, Molly licked her lips nervously. You were just a little boy when he turned you into the chosen one. I've thought about that a lot these last 2 years, she admitted. She stared down at her hands, and she fisted them in her lap. And when the rune flared, you were just a toddler, and you didn't say anything. But it was terrible knowing that ever since you were barely a year old, you've been set on that course. You were just so vulnerable, just a baby. Harry felt an amazing pressure in his chest. Molly was the closest thing to a living mother that he had. Damn it. And the fact that she had seen that. Maybe they had some of their old closeness after all. But then again, Molly had a great capacity to love. What if it was only because he was the boy who lived? And it could have been anyone off the street that would have made her feel that way, because she was so tender-hearted. It may not even be him. He'd been a complete arse, and just because he loved them doesn't mean that they loved him. Mom, Ginny said loudly. Harry jumped. No, don't dash. Quiet, Harry, she said. Would you just tell him that you love him? Because he's missed you for a very long time, and he's agonizing over it. Harry's entire body twitched with discomfort. He felt trapped. He wanted to run, but he didn't. It was as though his feet were glued to the floor. He felt a little resentful that she would blurt out his emotions like that. He wouldn't do that to her. If she were feeling something obviously private, he wouldn't even consider making it public. Especially now, in this moment. He ruffled his hair and looked up at the ceiling. That hug with Ron before he had thought he was going to die had not been nearly as awkward as this. He was acutely aware of how the skin on his face burned. Of course we love you, Harry. Molly sounded surprised, shocked, even that she had to say it. We just felt like maybe we used to be the people you loved, but it wasn't really us anymore. Harry blinked and remembered his dream. The Weasleys on the other side of the chasm, and a bridge the shape of the rune. He wasn't afraid anymore. Well, I'm sort of afraid that I'm going to cry, Harry amended. It was worse because how often had he wished that he could die for his Weasleys? It had taken external force for him to realize that they were fundamentally the same people. And how could he not love them? That would be like him only loving people for what they did for him, rather than for who they were. The moment swelled, and Harry knew that he needed to say something. He cast about wildly, and then he felt Ginny like a flame in his chest, and she gave him the grace and strength to say what he needed to. He couldn't look anyone in the eye, however. He had his limits. I felt that way for a while, he admitted. He felt that the truth was necessary for this moment. But I'm not very proud of that. I've spent years and years wishing that people would like me for me, rather than because Tom Riddle warped the deepest laws of magic and gave me the tools necessary to defeat him. And you're the same people. You have the same care and concern for your children and loved ones. The same sense of humor, the same temper. It was easier to speak directly to Molly than to the men, though he hoped they knew that he meant the same for them. So yeah, you're the same people. You really are, and I'm sorry that it took me so long to see that. He faltered, then glanced around to look at Arthur's shoulder. He was still not ready to make eye contact. And frankly, if it turns out that my future daughter has traveled back in time to her 12-year-old body, I'll have to spend hours in the shed with you, because I'm sure I'd have a complete breakdown, especially if her shifty husband came with her. Everyone chuckled, as he had intended. Excuse me for a moment, Molly murmured and bustled out of the room. Harry wondered if she was about to burst into tears, though she had never been shy about doing it in front of company before. He still felt anxious, agitated, and desperately uncomfortable. He hoped that the twins had gone temporarily deaf, because once they realized that Harry genuinely cared about them, he'd be fair game for teasing and pranking. It seemed to take forever, but it must have been only a few minutes before Harry could hear her walking back down the stairs. She hesitated for a moment outside the door. Harry could almost see her steeling herself, and thought that she might be feeling as insecure as he did. He felt very exposed, as though he were laying on the ground with a wand pointed at him. and he didn't know if the person was there to help him or hurt him. He was fairly certain that if they rejected what he was offering, and he was already kicking himself for offering it in the first place, they weren't ready to have that same level. He really couldn't expect them to. A little part of him would be lost forever. And it's my own damn fault, Harry thought viciously. I shouldn't have pushed. I made this, she said. I would have given it to you, but I didn't know that you'd want it. And she held out a sweater. For long moments, all Harry could do was stare. It was green, and it looked soft and warm. He could tell without even trying it on that it was just his size. My sweater, he thought stupidly. It was a very simple thing. It was just an article of clothing. It was the sentiment behind it that had his heart beating rather rapidly in his chest. He remembered what his mother had said during his time with her, and he found the truth in her words once again. Always and always. The first time he'd said it, he'd had no idea how much meaning just 2 words would have in his life. Thanks, Harry said quietly. He took it from her, and, not even bothering to take off his other sweater, he pulled it over his head. He could feel Ginny's joy like sunlight, and it compounded his own. And then he knew that this was the moment. He patted his pocket, where the ring he'd purchased was a warm weight. He'd made a speech, but the words he'd wanted to say had flown out of his head. He did, however, remember to kneel, and for the first time, he deliberately sent his emotions to her. They swirled around inside him, and let her know how he had felt the first time he had proposed, that she was his reason for living. He felt the same now, but he was damn glad that they were going to get a wedding with everyone surrounding them. They would raise their children with their family beside them. Their children and Ron and Hermione's would grow up together. He hoped she felt his love for her like a kiss on her soul, because that was how it felt when she did it for him. When her beautiful brown eyes filled with tears, he knew that it had worked. Always and always, bright eyes, he said. His voice was steady, but his hands were not as he reached for hers. Marry me? Again? And this time our entire family will be there to watch. Molly started to sob in the background. Yes, she said immediately. Oh, yes. Harry slipped the ring on her finger. Everyone was talking, laughing, and Harry felt his shoulder clapped again and again, but he literally could not take his eyes off of her face, and he thought he just might burst from the joy of it. It had been a very long road with obstacles that Harry could not have foreseen, but he was finally home.
Thank you for the support, Harry Potter fans. Welcome back to the page. We've got a new chapter for Backward with Purpose, Part 1, Always and Always by Dead Woodpecker. Here we are with Chapter 47, The Sweet Far Thing.
Chapter 47, Epilogue. Chapter text. Epilogue. 32 years later. Harry Potter fiddled with a spell-enhanced marshmallow roaster while he maintained a steady stream of concerns. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to be a grandfather, and Sirius is certainly not getting any younger, and he needs to have some when he can still enjoy them. But honestly, do you think that James and Sarah are ready to have children? They only married 2 months ago. Are you certain that Sarah is pregnant? Arthur asked mildly. Ginny says she is, Harry said. And you know how Ginny is. She gets it from your wife, and Molly started giving us knowing looks practically the day after Lily was conceived. Arthur snorted. Are you sure that you aren't just concerned that you aren't ready to be a grandfather? That, and I'm afraid of what might come of a Potter and Black union. Harry shuddered. It was not entirely feigned. The fact that Harry's son had fallen in love with Sirius' daughter had shocked the entire family, not least because it was made public when Harry and Sirius walked in on them having sex in the kitchen at Grimmauld Place. Harry had told his son, truthfully, what his father had told him so long ago. James was a braver man than Harry. Harry would not want to be Sirius' son-in-law given how fierce and protective he was of his youngest child and only daughter. He suspected that his parents were laughing. Neville's only 6, Harry said a bit plaintively, and Viola is only 8. Am I really old enough to be a granddad? Arthur threw back his head and laughed. Ah, son, let me tell you a little secret. Being a granddad is infinitely easier than being a dad. Thank God, Harry muttered. Out of habit, he glanced around the shed. He had been a very frequent visitor in the last few decades. He'd panicked when Ginny had gotten pregnant for the first time, and Arthur had spent hours soothing him and giving him advice, mostly how to survive the pregnancy without getting his bits hexed off. He'd thought that things would calm down once James had arrived, but he'd spent even more time asking all sorts of things that he probably didn't need to fret over. All right, so what do I do if he accidentally levitates himself into the wall safe? I've heard that magical children can do that. What if I've left the safe open and it closes behind him? Do you think I should just get rid of the safe? Then James had started talking and walking and generally raising hell. All had arrived, and Harry had needed Arthur's calming nature every other day. Harry was proud of himself that he only met with Arthur about once a week now. His two youngest, Viola and Neville, were either much easier to manage, or Harry had, finally, gotten the hang of being a father. And now he just might be a granddad. And AL's been acting odd lately, Harry said. At least he's home for Christmas, Arthur pointed out. And you didn't actually have to depose the minister for not telling you what he was up to. Harry grimaced. He had not taken it well when his second son had practically disappeared off the face of the earth. Harry generally left all the unspeakables to hell alone, but ever since his son had fallen in with that crowd, gotten a job with them, the secrecy had bothered him. And the months of only sporadic contact with him, an owl, once a month, saying that he was fine, I was not much of a correspondent, had frayed Harry's nerves to the breaking point. I'm the head of the Aura department, Harry said sourly. You'd think that they could have told me where he's been and what he's been up to. You know that Audrey had no idea what was going on, Arthur said. And threatening to depose your own sister-in-law, he chortled. I laughed for weeks. I still think Percy knew, Harry said stubbornly. He did not like to think it. He was probably closest to Percy of all the Weasley brothers besides Ron. And despite the fact that Percy had, 13 years ago, decided to completely change his career and become an unspeakable without giving any reasons, Percy had always been very above board. You and Ron aren't still convinced that Percy's Merlin, are you? Arthur asked. Harry shrugged. It was a compelling idea, but it simply made no sense. Harry wondered if the person of Merlin even existed anymore. There didn't seem to be any need. All was well. All was better than well. Harry had never dreamed that he could be this happy, and he suspected that whatever reason Merlin had gone back in time in the first place simply did not exist anymore. Mainly we just joke about it, Harry admitted. But you have to admit, Percy's lips are sealed tighter than a Gringotts vault. Who knows what he gets up to with his unspeakable friends? You're dealing with something that is very difficult for any father, Arthur said. The idea that your children have lives that exist separately from your own. They have their secrets. For instance, I've always wondered how James survived Sirius after he and Sarah were found at Grimmauld Place. I've always wondered that too, Harry said thoughtfully. But none of them are saying. And it must be doubly hard with Al, Arthur said compassionately, since the very nature of his job requires him to tell you nothing about what he gets up to. I admit that when Percy first transferred over to the Department of Mysteries, I felt a bit misplaced. He doesn't come to me for advice, or to complain about his superiors, or even to brag about his latest promotion. Does it get easier? Harry asked. You get used to it, Arthur said. He glanced at his watch, and his eyes widened. Molly's going to jinx us if we miss Christmas dinner. We'd better get back to the burrow. Harry opened his eyes wide. Don't you want your Christmas present? He greatly enjoyed the way Arthur perked right up. Ron had come by his honest love of Christmas and presents honestly, and Harry had a feeling that Arthur would enjoy this particular present a great deal. It's a bit used. Viola insisted on trying it out just to make sure it was good enough for her granddad. With a flourish of his wand, he lifted the temporary disillusionment charm he had cast on the riding lawn mower, and laughed when Arthur gasped with delight. Is a lawn plower? He asked excitedly. I've been wanting one for ages. He touched it lovingly. It's so shiny and new. Thank you, Harry. Don't tell anyone I said this, but the Potters give the best gifts. Harry hugged him. Only the best for you. He felt a faint twinge of annoyance that was not his own. Ginny's getting restless, he announced. We'd better go back in before she gets riled. Harry laughed again at the mildly jealous look on Arthur's face. He was, Harry had to admit, the envy of the Weasley men. There was nothing like being able to sense his wife's emotions. It certainly kept him off the sofa. He still did not quite understand the magic behind the connection he and Ginny shared. There were no books written about it, No tomes showing diagrams for why things happened the way they did, and not even Hermione could pinpoint an exact reason. But the simple fact of the matter was that Harry could feel Ginny, and Ginny could feel Harry, and it was as beautiful as the sunset right after a bomb has exploded. Harry and Arthur walked in companionable silence back toward the burrow. Harry stuffed his hands in his pockets. The December day was as cold as iron, and their feet crunched on the snow. Molly's confessing that she's Merlin this year. Arthur broke the silence halfway across the yard. Harry grinned at the reminder of the annual game they played. It had become a tradition. Every year, one of them had invented a more and more outlandish tale. But she's put a twist on it. She's confessing that Merlin was, in fact, Dobby, and he told her on his deathbed that it had been him. Arthur chuckled. Harry joined in. This had the promise of being even funnier than last year, when Snape and Dumbledore's portrait had claimed to be Merlin, using a mixture of time travel, body snatching, and wart powder. It's Ginny's turn again next year, Harry said. I think she's already planning it. Molly thought of this last year. Arthur admitted. Said she wanted to try something new. I probably shouldn't have told you. You know, Harry said. The only person that Merlin ever said he wasn't was Dobby. Did we ever tell you that? He said, I'm not Dobby. He could have just been trying to throw us off the scent, though. Daddy, Neville shouted. Neville always shouts, Harry thought exasperatedly. His youngest had only come with 2 settings, shouting and sleeping. Did Granddad put your head back together? What? Harry said blankly. He lifted his youngest up in his arms, wondering how long Neville would allow him to do this. That's what Mummy says, Viola smiled. And stop shouting. Neville, Mummy says we have to practice being quiet for when James' baby comes. Oh, Merlin's balls, how did she know? James muttered, confirming Harry's fear. Sarah laughed. Harry saw the way his youngest daughter's bright green eyes sparkled mischievously. Another Slytherin, Harry thought wryly. And he had a good idea that Viola knew exactly what she had done. Shut up, Viola, Neville yelled. Mummy said not to say. Neville Arthur Potter, Harry said sternly. What we told you about telling your sister to shut up. Yeah, nap pie, Viola smirked. And don't make fun of your brother's name, Harry said wearily, before Neville could retaliate. His son had inherited his mother's temper, along with her red hair. Viola, however, was the female version of Harry. Better than AL's initials, James said, reaching over and ruffling his little brother's hair. With initials like ASP, no wonder he got into Slytherin. I'm going to be in Gryffindor, Neville roared. Harry winced and moved him so he was not quite so close to his ear. Like you and Lily. Of course you'll be in Gryffindor, James said bracingly. We'll leave Slytherin for Al and Viola, won't we? Yes. I'm going to beg the Sorting Hat to put me in Slytherin, said Viola, who practically worshipped Albus. We know, Mags, Ginny said fondly. Slytherin is great, Viola, Al said. He threw a casual arm around her thin shoulders, and Harry was forcibly reminded of how very much the two of them looked alike, despite the difference in gender. Viola had the same thin face, messy hair, green eyes, and sly smile. You'll really like it. Al looked around the room, an indefinable expression on his face, as though he were drinking in the sight of all of them. Al, Percy said quietly, did I ever tell anyone that I had a special, marauder-like nickname while I was at school? Al asked. He looked over and grinned at Sirius. A few of my friends call me the Wise ASP, since I'm a bit of a wise arse, and we were all in Slytherin. An ASP is a type of snake. Harry threw a startled look at Ron. It was funny that Al had gotten that nickname before they had sat down with him, on his 17th birthday, and told him the full truth of the time travel. He opened his mouth to remark on the funny coincidence. And a diversion in the form of Rolf and Luna Scamander and their 9-year-old twins arrived in a flurry of bundled packages, whispered swear words, and excitedly popping eyes. Neville and Viola immediately dragged Lorcan and Lysander, who were very cool since they traveled around the world with their naturalist parents, away to get into some sort of mischief. Remind me to check on them in 10 minutes, Ginny said. We don't want them to blow up the house. I suppose I shouldn't have given the twins that a rump and horn, Luna said vaguely. All the adults, even James, Al, and Lily, looked at her aghast. "Luna," Hermione said, "you gave those for hoodlums." Of course not," Luna laughed. Hermione hesitated only a moment, but then stepped forward and swept the blonde woman into a hug. "I've missed you," she said. "You haven't been back to Britain for almost 6 months. Ron has been driving me crazy." "Hey," said Ron, "you're the one who—" "Finish that sentence, and you won't even be allowed on the same floor of the master bedroom for the next month," Hermione warned. Her cheeks were bright pink. Harry did not want to know what this was about. The next several minutes were spent in such a cacophony of greetings. Harry shook Rolf's hand at least 3 times, hugged Luna 4 times, and joined in the overall joviality of the moment. Snape, who always missed Rolf a great deal at family suppers on Sundays. He's the only sane one the whole lot. And I never thought Looney would bring home someone who doesn't believe in Father Christmas and the Tooth Fairy. Was the loudest of all. "Aunt Luna," Lily said enthusiastically. "I got an internship with the Surrey Society for Specialized Species. I'm going to be a naturalist just like you." "That's wonderful," Luna said. She grabbed Lily up in a hug. Harry could not help but notice that Al and Percy had hung back and were now whispering urgently to each other in an alcove. He narrowed his eyes. Percy was A.L.'s godfather, so they had always been close. But Luna was A.L.'s godmother, and it was highly unusual for him not to be telling her everything that had happened since she'd been gone. He saw Percy give his head a vehement shake, and Al rolled his eyes. "Where's my godson?" Luna called. She spotted Al and hurried over to him. She was about to throw her arms around him, but stopped short. Harry glanced over at Ginny, then Ron, and then Hermione, all of whom were staring. Harry felt a growing denial that came from Ginny. What is she denying? What's going on? "Hi, Merlin," said Luna. Her voice rang in the suddenly silent room. "How'd you enjoy the past?" The floor dropped away from Harry's feet, and he felt his own shock compounded by Ginny's shock. "What the hell?" Harry gaped at Al, who was staring at the floor. No way. "Fuck," Ron said reverently. "Holy shit. It was fine, Aunt Luna," Al said. "It was just fine." Harry's second son took a deep breath and looked up. Green eyes met green, and Harry could see that his son was sheepish, defiant, proud, and not a little afraid. "Dad, Mom, everyone, I got a confession to make. I'm Merlin." Harry's world shifted, and he saw little bursts of stars. His brain tingled, and the swirl of a memory caught him up, as if he carried a pensive inside his head, and as if he were sucked through a door that had suddenly opened in his memory. Almost everyone he loved was dead. They were gone forever. They were never coming back. Tom Riddle was also gone, but Harry, who had spent the last decade fighting for that end, did not seem to care. He staggered onto the path that led to the forbidden forest just outside Hagrid's hut. It looked like Hagrid, too, was dying of wounds inflicted by Voldemort's giants. Emergency healers from St. Mungo's had looked as though there was little hope. This was what Harry had fought for, to be the last man standing. It seemed so ridiculous that Harry had laughed, a mad and wild sound that frightened him. It seemed to echo strangely among the trees. He looked down at the stone still held tightly in his palm. He had dropped it when he had been struck by Voldemort's killing curse. He did not want to summon them again. It had been all right when he had thought he was about to die. He'd been about to join them. They were fetching him. But now, how could he possibly bear the guilt of surviving? All of them, they died like they were supposed to, whether it was by the killing curse or flame or some other method. But no, he was Harry Potter, the boy who lived. It seemed like he was the only one who ever lived. He flung the stone into the trees as far as it would go. He couldn't possibly face them, not when it was so bloody unfair that he still breathed and they did not. He knelt on the ground and gripped his hair in his hands, pulling so tightly on it that it hurt. He wondered how he would do it. Should he slit his wrists with Gryffindor's sword? How was that for irony? Jump from the astronomy tower, his body broken and bent like Dumbledore's? Had actually come to this? He was plotting his own death instead of Voldemort's. The snap of a twig, the clearing of a throat, the intake of breath. Harry did not want to know who it was that had followed him. He knew who it wasn't. He rested his palms against the moist, springy earth and waited for whoever it was to talk. "It's going to be all right," said a firm, sure voice. Harry did not recognize it. He just shook his head. He was suddenly too tired to move. His wand was in his pocket, and he did not even have the strength to pull it out. So was fatalistic resignation he felt when ropes bound him hand and foot. "Coward," Harry said tonelessly, just because he had to say something. "Can't even kill me without making sure I can't fight back first." "I'm not going to kill you," whoever it was said. Harry cracked his eyes open. "What the hell?" he said blankly. There in the clearing was himself. The man before him was tall and thin, with untidy hair, eyes exactly the color and shape as Harry's. He looked closer. No glasses. No scar. He gaped at the other man, completely and utterly speechless. "Is it me?" Harry asked himself, unsure. "Listen," the other man said. "I've got to do this. I'm really sorry, but Dumbledore dash." Harry groaned. "Merlin, are we still listening to Dumbledore? If he'd told me that I was a Horcrux, everyone would still be alive. I would have died years ago. I'm not you." "That's really excellent," Harry said. He sounded very bitter. But here he was after his final confrontation with Voldemort. He had lost everyone, and now some scarless version of himself with perfect vision had come and tied him up. "Because I don't know how I would have survived having a second dash." He interrupted himself. He squinted at the man. The resemblance between the two of them was remarkable. It was striking. He was forcibly reminded of the time he had thought that he had seen his own father, but it had been his future self. "You aren't me from the future?" Harry asked uncertainly. "No," the man said. He met Harry's eyes steadily. "But I am from the future. Not this future, though. I didn't quite understand. Never mind. I'm your son. I'm Albus Potter." Harry fought against his bindings. "You're insane. We're insane. Or are you under Polyjuice potion?" "I'm telling the truth," he said. Then he flashed a quick smile. "You eventually go back in time with Mom and Uncle Ron to save everyone from this fate dash." "I fail again," Harry said, aghast despite himself. If what this lunatic was saying was true, he went back in time, and obviously he fucked something up again. Otherwise, the lunatic claiming to be his son from the future wouldn't be here. A vicious throbbing began behind his left eye. "I go back in time to change things, and I screw up again?" "No," said the lunatic. There was something shifty in his eyes. Harry eyed him suspiciously. "Did you screw everything up?" he asked. The lunatic took too long to answer, and Harry laughed incredulously. "I must have been a really great father," Harry said sarcastically. "You dash. I'll have to remind myself that if I ever have kids, I'll tell them to just say no to time travel," Harry interrupted. "You don't dash." Harry ignored him. "But it's not as though you're real, anyway. Just a figment of my imagination." The lunatic looked frustrated and sullen in turns. "Stop, if you'll just let me dash." But Harry did not like the idea that he had gone insane. He understood it, of course. His lifetime stretched out before him, and he was completely alone. Completely. He was already so lonely that he was hallucinating a conversation with his son from a future that could not exist. Not without Ginny. "This just seems fitting, doesn't it? I finally beat Voldemort and go insane dash." The lunatic muttered something underneath his breath. Harry opened his mouth to speak, but found that he had been silenced. For a moment he was uncertain. Can hallucinations do spells? He asked himself. "Mum, Ginny Potter, and Uncle Ron are alive," the lunatic said loudly. "You're going to go back in time and save everyone and eventually have me. And I'm going to help things a bit for you. And don't worry, I'm a professional." He continued to speak, but Harry was unable to comprehend what he was saying after he claimed that Ginny and Ron were still alive. Hope unfurled inside his chest, though he tried to stop it. It was going to hurt terribly if they were still dead. But if they were alive, and Dumbledore told me that I should do it, the lunatic said. He sounded defensive, and Harry felt suddenly apprehensive. He had a feeling that he would not like what was about to happen. Dash. But it was too late. A small bottle of potion was upended into his mouth. "I'll stay with you until the potion takes effect. It shouldn't be too long." The lunatic was trying to reassure him. Harry glared at the copy of himself. Everything was very surreal. What if he's telling the truth? A small voice inside his head asked. "And I'm going to have to confund you, too," he said apologetically. "Don't look at me like that, Dad. I'm sure you'd agree that it has to be done." Harry did not believe this. He vowed to tell any children he might have someday that Dad would not like it if they played with his memories and teamed up with Dumbledore to manipulate his life. They would be absolutely certain that. "Dad," Al said apprehensively. Harry could just stare as every moment in that forest came back to him. He had thought that Al was a lunatic. He'd thought that he'd been driven insane by loss. He surreptitiously pinched himself, wondering if he was dreaming. Al had been there. His son was Merlin. He'd traveled through time, stolen memories, twisted events, written that damn article, made Harry think that he was going to die. He'd been there in the Department of Mysteries when Harry had discovered just how powerful a force love actually was. He'd walked with Harry when Harry had thought he was going to die. He'd been there. His son. "It's true," Harry said. "I have a memory." "He must have used the Forget for Now potion on you," Percy murmured. "He used it on me as well. I presume the unlocking phrase was, 'I'm Merlin.'" "Al." Ginny's voice was unsteady. Harry did not take his eyes off his son, but he knew without having to look that everyone in the room was standing as still as statues. "Why?" "The price was too high," said Al.